the OGL situation?
What about
the open gaming
know
license?
what's going on
D&D is
here.
going downhill from here.
We
value your
It's still
feedback.
bad, and it's not getting
I could
better.
really go
We
for
must
some
start a
strawberry
ritual.
ice cream
Was
right
all
now.
your work for nothing?
What are you going to do
had
now?
so many hopes.
We must
so
begin
many
the plans to go back in
Cat,
time.
you better not
Will
lose
you
my
ever
dice.
be able to make your campaign
How
book?
is this
Dice.
possible?
Dice.
We must
Dice.
win the world.
Dice. Dice.
Is
Dice.
this the end
of everything?
Hey, what if we just do what we always do and pretend nothing is wrong even though we're dying inside? Hello everybody, today I am resuming my art for my campaign book, maybe? Even if it's not for my campaign book, I am trying to increase the diversity in my art ability, and it's been a hot minute since I've drawn a landscape, so here we are with more and drawing one of the many major cities in the Old Empire. Since I had only sort of an idea of what this place looked like, I started off with some good old thumbnails. And now, it's time for Ye Old Vassaldal history with Lady Splitchin. Vassaldal is essentially old-timey Australia for this world's pantheon, aka a prison. And a couple of gods who were up to no good started making trouble in the deity neighborhood. They got in one little fight, and the elder gods got scared and said, "We're moving you to a remote continent where your powers can't hurt our creations, and you can keep your horrible monstrous creations separate, and you will be guarded and kept in your captive states by the goddess of oracles and the goddess of death." And that's the story of how Vassaldal got there. Act 2, after the whole origin story and humanoids came into existence, a couple of twin Asimars were born by the name of Madrive and Morvir. Long story short, war. Short story shorter, dead twin brother Morvir. Long story short again, Madrive kills a lot of people and then starts an empire from the ground up. Time passes, Madrive is still alive due to the nature of her celestially blessed form, but enough time has passed that the empire of Exenir no longer remembers its origins. Begin Act 3. Present day. Some people in the continent feel like it cannot be sufficiently ruled by one really old and outdated lady, celestially touched or not. And they start a new empire in the western reaches of the continent with plans to press eastward. And that's where we find this city, Agnatha, on the Exenir side of the river that separates the old empire from the new empire. Agnatha is one of the oldest cities in the empire, not because a lot of people live there or anything. In fact, the population in Agnatha is constantly fluctuating. Agnatha was originally the location of a fortress from the early wars at the start of the empire. Many of the courtyards and long stretching walls along the river are repaired or rebuilt walls from the original structure. Over time, additions were made to create a more formidable wall and also increase the number of living quarters for citizens who moved or had been assigned to transfer to the city. Very few of Agnatha's citizens are permanent residents. Many are builders and workers constructing more walls, towers, and housing, and even more of the citizens are military personnel or recruits who have been sent for training. While the Empress has not made any advances into stopping the new empire from taking the land on the western side of the river, she has not neglected the need for more soldiers and the looming presence of a continent-wide war. Many recruits are sent to this location for training and then stationed at towers or smaller fortresses along the river or sent to other major cities to help with preparations elsewhere in the continent. Agnatha acts as sort of a customs point for people crossing the river on the southern half of the continent. The north half of the continent has a very mountainous region that acts as a natural barrier between the east and the west. But aside from the river, the south is a relatively open and easy to cross place. Actually, this sort of meeting of different land masses was something that I struggled with a lot when first coming up with thumbnails. My recordings for the thumbnailing process are extremely choppy at the start because I felt like I was considering just too many ideas for what it should look like in my mind. You see, because it's a fantasy world, I have many different types of biomes available on this continent. And because Agnatha is purposefully built at a very centralized location on the continent, it happens to be in a spot where a lot of different types of biomes will meet. So directly north we have mountains, some with snow, some with more temperate rainforesty climates. Eastward we have more of your classic English countryside vibes. In the south we have a desert and very arid climates, and to the west we're looking at something more along the lines of an Icelandic type climate. Not to mention this city is situated along a river. It's really hard to make sense of fantasy climates. So, in my very early thumbnailing processes, I had a cool gray yellow sand in mind, and the fortress was going to be constructed of a very dark, almost red brick. Think colors like sandstone and nether brick if you're thinking in terms of Minecraft. As much as I like this idea, I decided to give it a more neutral look. I kept the dark stones for the fortress walls, but I didn't really make them as red, and I also did my best to not really distinctly create a specific terrain or climate, besides some green bushes and the mountains in the background. Also, this image represents only the main portion of Agnatha, where there actually would be several clusters of these towers and walls, all dotted along the river heading south. Actually, speaking of south, you know what city lies pretty much directly south of Agnatha? That's right, Icthrul, a city name you might recognize as being the current home of my trio, Marilith, Ezra, and Isegwyn. If you watch my video on Isegwyn, you will know that she makes very stealthy trips northward to a city by the name of Basilia, which means she would eventually come into contact with Agnatha along the way. So I haven't really thought about this aspect all the way through, but it makes me think that in such a strict military city, there must be either a few people on the inside of the city who are letting Isegwyn pass through, as well as possibly some secret passages left from the original fortress's architecture. And I think it makes a lot of sense that there would be allies in the city since Icthrul is neutral territory. While not necessarily a safe or trustworthy city, maintaining a positive relationship with Icthrul could lead to expansion of guards and towers further south, and also help to prevent the new empire from coming around and swallowing the old empire from both the west and south sides. And if there are neutral territories, you're much better off creating an ally of them instead of an enemy. And as far as secret tunnels, it's very likely considering how old many parts of the structure are, and the possibility of lots of different builders from various parts of the continent coming to add and mesh their personal architectural style in some of the buildings or portions of the wall. Even if all the materials used would be the same or very similar, Agnatha would retain trademarks of the different construction teams that came to lend their aid. Plus, having secret underground or between the walls mysteries in a fortress that is 1,000 years old, seems pretty cool to me. Also, claiming that many different builders worked on this and that the style is incongruent from section to section is my excuse to brush over the primary reason why I do not particularly enjoy drawing castles and fortresses. I just feel like there is probably architecturally an optimized way to build a fortress, especially if you're considering war and you want to build it quickly and efficiently. So you probably wouldn't have so many types of shaped towers, you would get very practical boxy buildings with very little decoration, and in architecture of a single building, in general, there are often a lot of repeating elements and themes and a lot of balance. And I know this is probably just a result of me not being as comfortable being creative when it comes to drawing buildings and landscapes than I am with people, but I just feel like a humanoid being has more flexibility as far as the little details. They can carry little knickknacks, they can change the way they keep their hair, they all have different body shapes, lots of different clothes, accessories, and it doesn't necessarily have to be practical. And I probably could give more character to a building if I thought about it a little bit harder, thought about weathering, or thought about the type of people that live there, but I just didn't. So welcome to the struggle bus that is Lady Splitchin trying to learn new things, but also being afraid of going outside of her comfort zone. In my defense, the final time for this drawing is over 6 hours. Granted, that included the thumbnailing process, but I didn't even record my entire thumbnailing process, and that was about an hour of the work. So I know this drawing doesn't look like it took that long, but cut me a little slack, okay? Part of what contributed to the length of the video was that instead of doing a more abstract and soft drawing, I absolutely decided that I had to draw in all the lines for each of the stone slabs. So I go in with the line tool and do my best to get perfect straight edges and mark in where the bricks will go. And to be honest, this whole process is a bit of trial and error because of how I went back and forth about whether I wanted bricks, bigger slabs of stone, or if I just wanted to do a more stucco concrete wall situation and add wear and tear that way. I did end up with the large brick stone slabs just because it was the least work, but because I only had decided this as I was working on it, you'll see differences in the way the stones are positioned or the size of the bricks, and we'll just pretend that that's because of the number of different people working on the project. How could it possibly be uniform? Oh man, this little round tower here, I love how he turned out. My least favorite tower is probably the more squared tower right here to the right of it, but shh, don't tell her. She's still loved, just not as loved as this little round boy. I know the arches aren't perfectly symmetrical and hardly make sense lighting-wise, but something about the look of this tower just scratches the itch in my brain. There were a lot of little details to it that I added that made me wish I had worked on this tower first and then moved on to designing the rest of the sections, but I had the octagonal towers in my mind first when creating this fortress, so that's just a loss I'm going to have to deal with. And in my mind, there are more of these round fancy towers that exist further along the riverbank. Not to jump around subjects here, but if you haven't watched the older videos in my campaign book series, you might be wondering why I'm not coloring the entire canvas. And I sort of have this brush edge look going around the drawing. That is because I want this art to be sitting at the corner of a page in my campaign book and sort of blend into the page, instead of just being a square or rectangular image block that's sitting in whatever awkward corner. I actually still don't have the section of my book written up on Kutsia, which is the last landscape drawing I did, but here's an example of how my drawing from like 5 months ago looks next to the text blurb that I have written up about Agnatha. I think it just looks really, really cool. I know that if I ever do get the chance to publish the book formally and put it in a book formatting program, I'm going to have to redo all the script and image placements, and formatting it in a document is technically a little bit of a waste of time, but I can't help but love how it looks, and it just makes me a little bit excited for potentially getting to see a printed version someday, hopefully, you know? And yeah, I'm still in the brick drawing process here, and I will be for a while. I think it would be great if I could get better at thumbnailing landscapes and then also implying things as opposed to actually drawing things. For example, in the drawings that I used for references, there are a lot of items that are just implied shapes as opposed to actually highly detailed items. And I especially want to take note of the much more subtle changes in light that imply a change in depth without having sharp lines and high contrast present all throughout the art. I think it is definitely a skill that I'm still learning, still working on. And I mean, I do genuinely think, because my art style has changed actually a lot over the last 5-6 months, that even though I haven't been doing landscapes this entire time, I still feel like I have improved, even if it's just a little. In my older drawings, there's even more high contrast from my current work, a lot of tiny details, and a lot of inconsistent, very harsh lighting that I feel like should look a little more diffused. And at the time, I was very proud of these pieces, and honestly, I still do think that they're lovely pieces, and they turned out really nicely for as much effort as I put into them. But I think I have improved a lot, and I'm definitely still improving. And going forward, I especially want to improve when it comes to landscape and finding a nice middle ground between implied shapes and the more detailed concept, as well as adding detail and weathering to a building without overwhelming the piece too much. The problem with using a plan-to-be-published campaign book to learn how to make landscapes and improve over time is that you will be able to see clearly what drawings came first and what drawings came later. And I may feel inclined to go back and redo some of the drawings again, but also it would be kind of cool to have an art book of my progress. I don't know. After the, in my opinion, very satisfying addition of a rocky, gravelly beach, I do a few finishing touches, and then I begin working on this wall piece as well as the final tower. And yeah, back to bricks. You may notice that I decided not to include the gate that I had originally planned for in my thumbnail. I was just a teeny tiny bit fed up with making more details, and knowing that I had a whole nother tower to work on, yeah, we're just gonna draw bricks. On this last tower, I do carry over some of the design elements from our favorite boy over on the other side of this stretch of building, which I did for continuity and also because I love the little tower and he deserves to have more fun designs elsewhere repeated in the drawing. I do think this one distinctly came out worse than our good boy on the other side, but I was at the end of my rope and running out of steam, so we're just gonna have to deal with it looking the way it does. At this point, my hand was cramping, my back was hurting, and I was sick and tired of having to draw more bricks. The real question here is drawing bricks worse than drawing hair? I don't know if it's quite so bad, but it's on some really thin ice. The way that bricks repeat patterns consistently is something I loathe, that hair will never really have. However, bricks are much easier to draw quickly with the line tool, which I don't have a hair specific brush in my gallery as far as I know, so that brings bricks back into a more neutral zone. But finally the bricks are done, the last few plants are added, and we can look at the final result. Behold, Agnatha! I know the city probably doesn't have a strong meaning to you yet, but hopefully I can go back to drawing characters eventually and maybe get around to developing some of the significant characters that live in this weird city. Also, here's a picture of what the drawing looks like when it's in place surrounded by information about Agnatha. I think she looks beautiful. My only regret is leaving the lower left corner blank, as I feel like it draws the eye in a weird way. On another note that I'm not sure if I regret or not is that I don't use the watercolor brush to create the cool edge that I have on the Kutsia drawing, for example. I can't decide if I like one better or the other, and maybe I just want to give it the watercolor brush edge so it has like a sort of continuity throughout the book, but maybe having a mix of both of this sort of naturally created border and the watercolor border is a good idea in the book. Let me know what you think and I might go change it, or I won't because I'm tired of working on this drawing, but who knows? Not me.